This is the first of 6 linked podcasts to support the revision session from yesterday, which was about Nazi methods of control. This first podcast is about the cult of the Fuhrer. It's useful to review this podcast, to play this podcast with the mind map that was issued in the presentation yesterday. We're obviously focusing on this particular strand here, so the key facts from the presentation, map them onto the mind map as we go through it. Okay, to start off, the cult of Fuhrer. Nazism was very much of a religious style cult, not religious in a Christian sense. There was absolutely nothing religious, nothing Christian about the Nazi movement. Hitler despised anything to do with pity, any Christian virtues, for example, looking after the weak. Hitler had no time for any of that. Hitler's whole philosophy, his whole ideas were about ruthlessness, and he valued violence as a solution to problems. I mean, the ultimate form of violence which he believed in was warfare. So there was nothing Christian about Hitler. However, he did borrow heavily from organised religion as a way of taking control over people's minds, and not least the way in which he used rituals. And so he developed a cult around himself, almost as a messiah, as a saviour, somebody who was taking Germany to the promised land. So that's a key aspect, really, of how Hitler controlled the German people. Propaganda had a huge emphasis, huge focus on Hitler himself. For example, on every 20th of April, which was Hitler's birthday, there was a national holiday for the German people. Just one example of many rituals which were focused on Hitler. The most famous ritual, of course, was the Heil Hitler salute, which all Germans were expected to use publicly. This was a way of isolating Germans, one of many techniques that the Nazis used. An individual German may not like Hitler, they may have doubts about Hitler, but because everybody was expected to go around doing the Heil Hitler salute, you felt isolated. You looked around and everybody else was doing it, and you thought, well, if I have doubts, they must be only mine. Everybody else seems to support, and because you would never dare show your doubts or speak them publicly, it was just best to go along with the flow and use these public displays of support. Other public displays of support, the plebiscites. Remember, voting stopped in 1933. There were no longer Reichstag elections, but every so often the Nazis would announce a vote over a question. The term we use today is referendum. These were called plebiscites. And these happened on 4 occasions. For example, in 1934, in August 1934, people were asked, do you agree with Hitler merging the Chancellor and President to become Fuhrer? And they were just simply asked yes or no. The vote was not secret. The papers were looked at by the SA and the SS, so therefore people felt obliged to vote, so there was intimidation, although in the early years it must be said that people did vote yes because they genuinely believed Hitler was doing a good job for the country. But later on, the plebiscites, people voted yes because of fear. That certainly was a characteristic. Other rituals we mentioned in a previous presentation, the Motherhood Cross. That was Hitler focused because it was on every August the 12th when these medals were given out. So again, it was a public gesture. It was a way of focusing on Hitler because August the 12th was Hitler's mother's birthday. Other ones, the so-called Winter Help. On the slideshow, if you click on the link, it takes you to useful information about the Winter Help scheme. As explained there, the SA, they were still around after the Night of the Long Knives, but they were largely reduced to what was called the can rattlers. They would go from door to door, expecting good Germans to contribute some money to the Nazi party, and not because they needed the money, it was just more a public gesture, a way of showing you supported the Nazis. Lots of examples of winter help. The picture here, you can see it's a postage stamp, and it's got the initials WHW on it, which was the letters for the Winter Help scheme. One example of winter help was the so-called one-pot meal. Once a month, families, as a gesture of support for the Nazis, were expected to only have one course for their meal, and the money saved by not cooking the other courses would be contributed to the party. So when there was the knock on the door, you would contribute that money to the party. Okay, so that's the first podcast on the cult of Fuhrer. Test yourself on your knowledge. Make sure that the key facts, the answers to these questions are on your mind map. Make sure that you put those facts onto an index card. You stick them on your wall so you can regularly review them and so you can remember them. On the next slide, there are the answers. So pause this podcast while you go through these questions just to test your knowledge, and then go to the next slide and review the answers. Okay, so I'm going to just give you a second to pause it, and now I'm going to just move to the answers. Okay, so there are the answers to those questions. The next podcast will focus on the aspect of terror and fear. Thank you.